we need to go into the scriptures with a decided hermeneutic, that we are going to interpret the scripture according to certain principles. And these are the principles that we're going to look at. Now, when we properly interpret the Bible, it is the result of exegesis. Exegesis is a noun, and the verb, I guess if there, well, it's not really a verb. It's used as a verb today. People say that they exegeted a passage, or they will, but really it's a noun. You provide exegesis. And it's the careful, what I have written down here, the careful systematic study of the scripture to discover the original intended meaning as the original recipients were to have understood them. So when we read Paul's epistle to Rome, the book of Romans, it's what we need to do is look at it from their perspective and try and understand it the way they would have understood it almost 2,000 years ago in Rome when they received the letter. So, and we'll get into some of the ways that we do this. But that is how we provide proper exegesis. We delve into the scriptures carefully, systematically, and try to understand them the way they would have understood them originally. That's where we come to a proper understanding of the scripture. Now, once we do that, then we can make applications. But we do that after we come to the proper interpretation. This is what it means. Now I can apply that to my life in a certain manner. Paul does this in the book of Romans, for instance, when he, in chapter 9, he takes a verse from Hosea, and which says, I'll call them who are not my people. Well, in Hosea, he's speaking of the Jews, but Paul applies that to the Gentiles. Now, he understood the proper meaning, but he could take that by way of application and apply it. So we can do that too, and that doesn't affect our exegesis. But we first have to come to a proper understanding of what the Bible actually means in that passage. And then when we apply it, we will avoid the danger of marching around a woman 7 times and blowing a trumpet and watching the walls of her heart fall down, right?
That's a good example of bad application of
no exegesis. Yeah, exactly. And the opposite of exegesis is eisegesis. And eisegesis here is the process of misinterpreting a text in such a way that it introduces one's own ideas reading into the text. So we can be guilty of that if we go to the scriptures with our mind made up on a particular issue. For instance, I'll pick a controversial one, like divorce and remarriage. If I already have my mind made up that divorce is, let's say it's always wrong, and if the person does get divorced, they can never get remarried. Now, if I already have my mind made up in that regard, and I go into the scriptures, then it doesn't matter what the scriptures say, it's never going to convince me otherwise. I already have my mind made up. I will, if I come across a passage that seems to indicate something different, I'll twist it to fit my presupposition, my agenda, and people do that all the time, and well, not all the time, but they do it a lot.
There's one of the people at my class. We were doing an exegesis, and we have to do it for a final exam thing that we do. And so we just had to do a little bit of it, and we were doing a book of the Bible, and it was just one chapter, and the Bible teacher said just for us to do sort of apply it to us or whatever, and so we did. And then this girl, she just said how much in 6 steps the salvation things, and she I don't know, but it was just this and then this and then this and then this, and it wasn't even in chapter 1. And then it was just well, what's the point? You just summarized the whole book of Romans. It was the book of Romans!
Well, see, that's eisegesis. She took something from another place and try to apply it into that one chapter that she was doing, right?
Yeah.
And it's easy to do. And see, if we don't have a plan already, then we'll fall right into that, right? That's why it's good to understand that to go into the Bible already having a hermeneutic, a method of a principle of interpreting scriptures, to go into it without an agenda, and to find out what it really means. And we.
So I think going into it with the basic the premise that I'm going to try and be like a person, understand this like the person who was there at the time,
Yeah.
would have understood it.
Yeah.
That's a big responsibility because it takes time and effort
Exactly.
to discover that, right? But that is the way you're exactly right. That is the way you can really know what God's really saying.
Exactly. And I just realized I left my notes here from the historical part there. Because that's where we enter into the historical aspect of the hermeneutic, right? Because the hermeneutic, there's two basic hermeneutics out there. One is the covenantal hermeneutic, which is very fluid. For instance, they'll come across passages, and I'll try not to get ahead of myself there, but they'll come across passages that will say, for instance, that Satan will be bound for 1,000 years, okay, during the millennial kingdom. And they say, because they've already determined in their mind that there isn't going to be a 1,000-year millennial kingdom, so they determine that since it's been 2,000 years since Christ died, well then this 1,000, they come across the word, wait, it's right there, 1,000 years. 1,000 years must therefore mean at least 2,000 years. And if Christ doesn't return for another 1,000 years, well this 1,000 years will mean 3,000 years.
I've met people that have done that before.
Oh yeah, they do it all the time. Or another thing, they come across Israel, they read Israel in the Old Testament, and they say, well, this is the church in the Old Testament. And they come across the word church in the New Testament, and they say, well, this is Israel in the New Testament. Instead of just leaving it be, okay, that's Israel, this is the church, 1,000 years, 1,000 years. And trying to develop, what they've done is they've gone in with a system, and they've tried to make the Bible fit the system. And covenant theology is very good at that, and it's been around. A lot of people like it because it is fluid. They can make the Bible say whatever they want, and it can be quite dangerous. And then there's also, but on the other side of the coin, this is the hermeneutic that I believe makes much more sense, is what's referred to as a dispensational hermeneutic. Now, not everybody who calls himself a dispensationalist holds to a dispensational hermeneutic. Some groups like different aspects of this, so they take an aspect of it and say, well, I'm a they like the rapture, because they don't want to go through the tribulation. So I like the rapture, so that makes me a dispensationalist. Therefore, when I interpret the Bible, I'm using a dispensational hermeneutic. But that's backwards thinking, right? Like it's not, we don't pick and choose little pet doctrines and then try to apply them to the Scripture, because then we're not doing anything different than the covenantal brethren, right? Dispensational hermeneutic is made up of 3 parts, and those 3 parts are a literal or a plain sense understanding of the Scriptures.
A literal? Is that what you said?
A literal or
A literal.
No,
The literal, it's literal.
the literal.
The literal interpretation.
Literal, yeah. Literal interpretation or a plain sense interpretation. Same thing. A grammatical aspect of interpreting the Scripture, and an historical aspect of interpreting the Scripture. So a dispensational hermeneutic is a literal, grammatical, historical method of interpreting the Scriptures. That's the dispensational hermeneutic. And it sounds basic enough, and when we start looking at it, you're going to think, well, this makes sense. But the key to this is doing it consistently. It doesn't matter if you're studying in Genesis or if you're studying in Revelation. It's the same hermeneutic throughout the Bible. It doesn't matter if you're reading a poetic book or a prophetic book. The same principles apply.